This is some straight up fairy tale princess hair, and I am living, breathing, dying for it. Like, I feel like I could sit on a shore and lure men to their deaths like a siren. Like, it's really great. Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my August wrap up. As per every month, where has the time gone? I know that everyone's kind of saying this. I feel like the summer months go by way faster than any other month, and I feel like I just said that about July and now it's August, and I'm like, what just happened? I actually had a really good reading month in August. I read 9 books, which I think is the most that I've read all year since I've been in kind of a busy period of life and stuff. But I also decided to start grad school again, and so I'm starting that on the 6th of September. So we'll see what happens. Although when I was in grad school, I read probably the most I've ever read because I was doing reading to procrastinate, so we'll see what happens. But 9 books for this month was a really good start. This month was also ARC August, which I did participate in, and that is a reading challenge that is put on by a couple of bloggers. I will link them down below. It's at the blog Read, Sleep, Repeat, and you just read as many ARCs as possible in a month. It's good for bloggers, reviewers, etc. So I participated in that. I didn't read as many ARCs as I had hoped to, but I read a good chunk, probably half of what my TBR was, because I had a really ambitious TBR of like 17 or 18 books, and I knew that wasn't exactly going to happen, but I read half of the amount that I wanted to read because not all these were ARCs. I'll just get to it. The first book that I read this month was The Magician King by Lev Grossman. I picked this up because Kayla of Bookadoodles and I are doing a Magician's Summer read-along. We are a little bit behind because we didn't read the last book in August, but we are going to, and we're going to do the live show in September, most likely live because we're going to be hanging out in September. So if you guys want to join us for the very last book, to talk about the last book and just the culmination of the whole series, feel free to join us. I'll leave the Goodreads group down below so you can go and join us and discuss and everything. But anyway, I have done a full review on this one already, so I'm not going to go into it. It is the second book in the Magician series, and I was somebody who didn't enjoy the reading experience of the first book, but enjoyed what it was doing and was interested to read the rest of the series, and this book stepped it up completely. The characters were not necessarily more likable, but I think I was more used to them. They are very like morally gray characters, not necessarily good people, realistic for people who would be getting magic when they're not necessarily supposed to have magic in our world. And the other characters that were added in, we get a lot of their backstory, which is really great, and I loved that. And the plot and the pacing was just better overall. So if you are somebody who just read The Magicians and gave up, or just tried to read The Magicians and gave up, power through it and get to this book because this book is just immensely better. I gave The Magician King 4 out of 5 stars. I then reread The Heart of Betrayal by Mary E. Pearson. This is the second book in the Remnant Chronicles, and I already did a full review for this last year. Everything I said last year is still true. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. This is my favorite book in this whole series. I just love it. I tabbed up everything about it, and it was a wonderful, glorious reread. I waited until like right before the last book came out to do that though, which I have been in a really bad habit of doing with sequels lately. I need to stop. And then I obviously read The Beauty of Darkness by Mary E. Pearson, the last final book in the Remnant Chronicles. I'm still not over it. I'm still upset that the series is over. I just wanted more time with these characters. I love them so much. I'm not okay. I've already done a full review on this book as well, but obviously it's one of my favorite series. I loved it. I love this conclusion. It is a lot longer than the rest of the books in the series, and I've noticed that has been happening a lot with YA trilogies lately. Like the last book is just so much bigger, and I don't know why that is. I don't know why that's leading me to commonly be disappointed in them. I loved this book, obviously. I tabbed it all up. I loved it. But again, I'm just always kind of left disappointed by finales, and this one just didn't quite meet my expectations, but still a 4 out of 5 star book. I still loved the conclusion. I'm glad that the things that happened. I'm just always left like wanting a little bit more with things, and that's completely my problem. For most people, this is probably going to be a 5-star book. I then finally started the ARCs for the month, and the first one that I picked up was I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. This is an immensely popular YA contemporary about twins, Noah and Jude, and it takes place in both of their perspectives but in different times. So we follow Jude when they are older, and we follow Noah when they are younger, and they kind of intertwine, and you kind of figure out where their kind of relationship and dynamic went wrong, and all these things. Like, things are very different in both timelines, even though they're only about 2 years apart. And I love Jandy Nelson. One of my favorite contemporaries of all time is This Guy Is Everywhere, which was her first book. I loved it, and I was very skeptical to read this one because I just loved that one so much that I was like, can this one live up? And what if it replaces that one? And da-da-da-da-da. Like, I had a lot of fears about this one for some reason, and I loved it. Her writing style, for the things that she covers and the themes that she covers, is amazing, exquisite, beautiful. I've done a full review on this, which is coming up, I think on Monday, but I loved this book. The hype is so worth it in my opinion. Jandy Nelson is able to cover really complex topics like grief and love and family and just really dig in deep, and it's not sugary or flowery. Like, she has a beautiful writing style, but it's not, like, it's brutally honest in a lot of ways, and I love the way that she covers all these topics, and she definitely shows things as like a gray area in all of her books, and it's not as simple as some other books or works of fiction or anything just like dilute some stuff into. So I adored this book. It's beautiful. It's a book that I could definitely reread and tab up, and yes, I loved it just as much as The Sky is Everywhere. They're both equal in my opinion for different reasons. I just love the character she creates. I love like the world that she builds and the people that you just want to like meet because they seem so real. They're like jumping off the page at you. People need to make her books into movies. Like, why are we wasting any of our time on any other YA contemporaries being adapted into movies when we could do these? Like, why? I obviously gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I then picked up Wolf by Wolf by Ryan Groudon. I picked this book up at BEA last year and have been waiting for some reason. Then finally, the next book was coming out at this BEA, so I just figured I'd wait and hold off. But this one is a very interesting story. It's an alternate history where Germany won the war, and so it takes place after that, and it's following like a rebel group of people who are trying to now overthrow Hitler. And their plan is for the main character, Yal, to infiltrate this motorcycle competition in which she can impersonate one of the only female motorcycle champions because Yal is a shapeshifter. Now, based on the title and the shapeshifting element that I saw in the synopsis, I personally always thought it was going to be some kind of like werewolf shapeshifting, and it's not. And I think I would have read it sooner if I would have known that. It is where she can shapeshift into other people and impersonate people, and I think that that is just fantastical enough that it makes it more readable, where if it was like werewolf shapeshifting, I'd be like, what? So for some reason I was thinking it was going to be like werewolf shapeshifting, and it's not. So if you're thinking the same thing, don't put it off because of that. It's not that kind of like paranormal. But I really enjoyed this book. I thought the plot was super fast paced, and it kind of mixed like Inglourious Bastards with The Hunger Games, but don't think like The Hunger Games are like a dystopian, you know, don't go completely Hunger Games, but the feeling that you had of being in this motorcycle competition, which is fairly deadly, like they don't have to kill each other or anything, but it's dangerous, and always having to come up against a new obstacle, it felt very similar to the feelings you get when you're reading The Hunger Games, and then mix that with like this Inglourious Bastards, you know, alternate history taking down Hitler thing, and you get a really good combination. And I really liked the characters, I liked their problems, I didn't think that anything was predictable, and I really enjoyed it. There were some elements that I think I was just not in the right mood for, so ultimately I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. I'm looking forward to the next book in the series. It's a duology, so I plan on reading the last book in the series this fall sometime, and then doing like a wrap-up review on both books in the series instead of individual reviews of both books in the series. I then read furthermore by Tejada Mafi. I picked this book up at this year's BEA, and this is Tejada's new middle grade standalone, and it follows a girl named Alice who lives in a world that is full of color and magic, and color kind of denotes magic in her world, but she was born almost completely colorless except for the color of her eyes. Also, her only close relationship has been with her father, and he has suddenly disappeared about 3 years ago, so she is just waiting for the time when she turns 12 years old and she can perform in this kind of village-wide talent show where you show your magic, and after you show your magic you get assigned a kind of quest, so she's waiting for that to happen. But right before that's about to happen, somebody from her past shows up and they reveal some information that she might want to follow, and everything kind of takes off from there. This was a very cute story. It feels very much like the Fairyland series by Catherine M. Valente, and that it's a very eccentric, kind of its own fairy tale in its own contained story, so I really enjoy that. It does take some kind of fairy tale tropes and stuff like that, but it makes it its own completely. I do have a tendency to not enjoy middle grade that much. I have a harder time connecting to the characters for some reason. Middle grade series are better for me, but middle grade standalones, I just don't feel like I have enough time to really connect to these characters, but I really enjoyed Alice as the main character. She's very spunky and sassy and stubborn, and those are my favorite kind of protagonists. There were times when I almost felt like Tejada wanted this to be a YA. Like, again, she wrote to be middle grade, but like there were times when it's like, you're a YA author, and you can kind of tell because there's things where I could see like if this was YA it would go this way, and I can kind of tell that it would. So that is my only complaint about it, but overall I couldn't really predict anything that was going to happen. I really liked the main character, and I liked the world. Is a very magical middle grade story, and I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. I do have a full review for this one, which I will link on the screen. I then picked up The Dream Quest of Villette Beau by Kiz Johnson. I requested this book from Tor.com Publishing, and it came out on August 16th. This is an adult dark fantasy novella that takes place in the dream world. Our main character is a professor at a women's college in the Dreamlands, and one day she finds out that one of her students has run away with a man from the waking world, and she has to try to stop her because she is connected, the student is connected to a bunch of very important people in the Dreamlands, and everything could basically fall apart. So she goes off on a mission to try to track down this girl and to protect everybody in her realm from basically imploding if this girl actually succeeds in leaving. This is a shorter book. It is a novella, and I really enjoyed reading it. I liked our main character. There's a lot of things that are said about women in here, and women in regards to how men view women and how women are pushed to the side a lot in stories and everything, which I found really interesting. There were elements about it that I didn't quite understand, and about like the world building and stuff, I felt like stuff wasn't really explained. But then when I finished reading, I got to the author's note and read that this novella is kind of a response to an H.P. Lovecraft story. Kish Johnson grew up reading H.P. Lovecraft, and one of H.P. Lovecraft's story is called The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, and this is kind of a response to that. Kish says how she never saw herself in Lovecraft stories and these kinds of stories that she had growing up, and H.P. Lovecraft is known for being fairly racist and fairly sexist, and most of his stories don't have any women at all, and she mentions how this story didn't have any women at all. So this is her kind of responding to that. So it's almost like a retelling, but it's an afterward retelling. So if you're familiar with H.P. Lovecraft, I think you'll really enjoy this more than I even did. I enjoyed it just not knowing anything about it, but my boyfriend is a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and I said, like, you should probably read this and see, because this will have all the stuff that you want to have in H.P. Lovecraft, because he's like, wow, it's really like racist and sexist, but I like to like monsters and stuff. So I was like, read this, and it's kind of a response to that. So he's going to read it at some point, and then I'll kind of get a little opinion on that and how he feels about it based on knowing the actual story. But if you're a fan of Lovecraft, but not a fan of some of the like stuff that he does, then I think you'd really enjoy this. Again, it's a response. It's kind of a fan response to a like major fantasy canon work, which is really cool. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars just based on my enjoyment of it and my understanding with not having a ton of understanding. But if you're a fan of Lovecraft, like I said, definitely check this one out. I'd be really excited to hear what you thought of it. Keeping in theme with the kind of weird, I read Vasta in the Night by Sarah Porter. I picked this one up from BEA as well. It's coming out from Tor Teen in September. I will have a full review for this one closer to release date. So this is a young adult urban fantasy story. It takes place in our world in New York, but in this version of our world, magic is real if you look in the right places, and it does affect everybody else around it, but it's not everywhere, and it's not something that everybody has. So our main character, Vasta, lives in New York, and she's been noticing that night is getting longer and longer, and that days are getting shorter and shorter. And also in her neighborhood, there is a weird chain of stores called Be Wise, and it dances on chicken legs, and it's run by an older creepy woman named Babs Yaga. If that does ring a bell with you, this is a retelling of one of these stories revolving around Baba Yaga, which is a Russian folktale. And so this definitely speaks to that kind of macabre sensibility that that original fairy tale does have. I'm not going to get too far into it because, like I said, I am going to be doing a full review on this one, but like I said, it's macabre, it's weird. It's YA, but it definitely has like a gory sense to it. So if you are into like darker fantasy, I think you'll definitely enjoy this. Like, this book doesn't really hold back with any of that. It is a little harder to follow because it is so macabre, and it is like stuff will happen and you're like not really sure why it's happening. Like, I find myself going back a lot and being like, okay, like, why is this happening? And like, who is this? And how do they connect to everything? And like, what's going on? And did that really happen? And like, that's really gross. And there's a lot of like dreams slash hallucinations slash things aren't quite real within this setting, so it's hard to kind of like follow sometimes. But ultimately, I liked our main character, I liked the side characters, and it was such an unpredictable myth because I'm not super familiar with like the original story. Like, I'm kind of familiar with it, but I haven't read it directly. I just know stuff from like pop culture references and stuff, so it was definitely harder to follow that. But it's weird and it's unique, and again, like, I can't follow the twists and turns that happened, and it's different. So if you're into like weird, strange, eclectic, macabre, if any of those things are your buzzwords, definitely pick this one up when it comes out this month. I gave Vasta in the Night 3 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read this month was Gemini by Kristoff and Amie Kaufman. This is the second book in the Illuminae Files trilogy, and the first book, Illuminae, was amazing. I picked Illuminae up last year at BEA and waited for a long time to read it, I think until sometime this year, and regretted doing that, so I knew I wanted to pick this one up before it came out. This one comes out in October, and I wanted to pick it up and know what happened ASAP. So this is sort of a companion novel, sort of not, to the first book. So it follows different characters, but it takes place in the same timeline. So it does take place after the events of the first book, but you're not following the same characters from the first book. And I did have a slight disconnect with that. I really did miss our characters from the first book. I connected to them so much, and I was hoping I would connect to these characters just as much, and I found that I didn't connect to them as much. I connected to the main girl, but I didn't connect to the main guy as much, which is crazy because he's a criminal in like a, you know, underground, almost mafia type system gang kind of thing, which is very much my thing, but I just didn't connect to him as much as I would have hoped to. I connected to the girl, she's great, but I didn't connect to him as much. And so I found myself kind of being like, I'm not quite connecting as much. And then there were some things that I felt like were not repeated exactly, but there were some themes that I felt like were very similar to the first book. But again, I think there was a way they might tie that into being a thing with this world. So we'll see if that happens. But there is this like kind of science versus nature element to these books, and that is kind of repeated in here, which is great because it kind of takes the theme all the way through the books. But again, I was kind of like, is this like Death Star number 2? Like, what are we doing here? I don't know. So there were some things about this that I didn't like. For about half of the book, I was thinking it was going to be like a 3.5 star book. And then the ending happened. And I'm definitely somebody that if you give me like a wonderful blow me away ending, like you will punch yourself into the next star category, and that's definitely what happened with this. And I'm not going to go into much about this book here, but I am going to be doing a full review closer to release date again for this one. But I did end up liking this one. I'm very much looking forward to the last book in the series. I'm wondering if we're going to get a mix of like some of the characters we met in this one and some of the previous characters in that one, or if it's going to be new characters again. I don't know. The series is crazy. If you loved the first one, you're still gonna love this one. I prefer the first one to this one, but I've heard a lot of people say that they love this one even more than the first one, so it all depends. But if you like the first one, you're still gonna like this one. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. So that is it for my August wrap up. There are some books on my ARC August TBR that I'm going to be reading still this month. There are some ARCs that I didn't get read this month, so in September I'm gonna be continuing that, but also mixing in some new releases. And I'm going to be gearing up for some like kind of creepier reads. Again, not too creepy because I am not a horror fan, but I have some arcs of stuff and stuff that I've gotten that kind of fits into the more like fall category. So between some arcs and some of those like new releases and just things that I want to read, I have a lot to read. But again, classes start in the 6th. So what am I even doing? So comment down below, let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all you guys soon. Bye!